In the latest development, the illegal immigrant who shot and killed Kate Steinle was acquitted of all criminal charges, with the exception of criminal possession of a firearm. He was acquitted of first-degree murder, second-degree murder, even involuntary manslaughter, which he is clearly guilty of. But you know who else is guilty of voluntary manslaughter? It's the politicians that made California the sanctuary state it is today, as well as the law enforcement officials over there who ignored the request of ICE to have this individual detained for deportation. And this is the problem with illegal immigration today. You have this group of uneducated, undisciplined, and unlawful people storming into a country whose culture and language they have absolutely no desire to learn. And they just do what they want. Once they have anchor babies, it's a free-for-all ride from there on. And they get free food, free housing, free education, free health care. And they can do what they want. They can drive drunk, get into car collisions, kill people, and they'll have sellout lawyers like the ones over there in California help them get off of any conviction. And this individual was previously deported 5 times. And you know how he was able to get back into the United States with such ease? And it's because there was no effective border wall. But that's changing now, and there has been significant progress being made. And I appreciate you checking this out, and I urge you to listen to what the people in these clips have to say so that you understand the reality of the situation. Thank you.
The illegal immigrant who murdered Kate Steinle has the charge of being a felon in possession of a gun, the last remaining conviction against him overturned. The state of California claims to crack down on guns except when they are in the hands of illegal immigrants who murder Americans. Unfreaking believable. It's time for First Thoughts. Jose Ines Garcia Zarate, the illegal immigrant deported 5 times and facing deportation at the time he murdered 32-year-old Kate Steinle, had his last remaining conviction overturned by a California appeals court last week. The Court of Appeal for the First Appellate District ruled Jose Zarate didn't get a fair trial when he, a felon, was convicted of possessing a gun. Of all the illegal immigrant coddling nonsense that comes out of this messed up state, that right there is the biggest load of BS I have ever heard. You know who didn't get a fair trial? Kate Steinle. Kate Steinle will be permanently separated from her family, all because an illegal immigrant with several deportations and no right to be here was in San Francisco on July 1st, 2015. Zarate was acquitted of first-degree murder, second-degree murder, involuntary manslaughter, and assault with a semi-automatic firearm. The only conviction he faced was being a felon in possession of a firearm, and now that has been overturned. Where is the justice for Kate Steinle, for her family, for the American people and legal immigrants who obey the laws and do our best to live in a state that prioritizes helping, shielding, and rewarding felons, illegal immigrants, and illegal immigrant felons over protecting and serving Americans and legal residents? This is an absolute abomination and a slap in the face to us all. And I don't care how liberal you are, even Democrats have to look at this miscarriage of justice and feel ashamed. Our Democratic leadership needs to answer for this. The illegal immigrant who murdered Kate Steinle might be off scot-free, but our Democratic leaders and sanctuary state advocates have blood on their hands. What an embarrassment to California.
Well, with reaction to this verdict, Mark Stein joins us tonight. This does, I mean, it just reminds you of a verdict 20 years ago in a case that was equally politicized, the O.J. Simpson murder trial, where the defense attorneys made it a referendum on larger injustice in American society. I want to read you a quote from one of the lawyers representing this man, in my view, is clearly a murderer, was just acquitted, as we're reporting. He said, and I'm quoting now, "This case is used to foment hate, division, and a program of mass deportation." So really, it sounds like this whole thing was recast as a political statement rather than a murder trial. So that, I mean, that's
Yes.
kind of the end of justice, isn't it? I mean, if trials can be subverted by national politics, then there's no hope for justice, right?
Well, I think it is a miscarriage of justice in the profoundest sense, in that Kate Steinle is dead because she went for a walk in a popular destination in her own city, and her parents will never see anybody convicted for that crime. There's no dispute. I mean, this is slightly different from the O.J. case, where at least he pretended to be looking for the real killers for the last 20 years. There's no dispute that this guy actually fired the shot or picked up the gun that then shot itself, and that this gunshot killed Kate Steinle. And there's no dispute either that this man should not have been in the country, that in fact he had been deported 6 times. And to go back to the old line, you know, about the jobs Americans won't do, every society has a proportion of murderers. Murder is a job that Americans will do, just as Dutchmen will do or Slovenes will do. You don't need to import foreigners to add to your murder population.
No,
this guy had a grade 2 education. We're told that the reason he got off is apparently because he's too stupid to understand what the cops were saying to him. So he gave conflicting answers about treading on the gun, finding the gun, firing at sea lions. He didn't understand. Why are we importing, and why is one political party, the entire bureaucracy, and 2/3 of the remaining political party fetishizing and sentimentalizing immigrants who can't speak the language with a grade 2 education, and setting up competing jurisdictions in this country that protect them at the expense of American citizens?
Right. Well, because they provide lower wages and handy voting blocks for those parties. So, but there's a massive cost, as you're pointing out, and as our viewers, of course, are well aware. This case gave rise to Kate's Law, as you know, much debated. But the reason it did was because the San Francisco authorities let this guy go, even after being asked by the feds to hold him for deportation. Right. They refused. So I guess it all adds up to a picture of not just, you know, treating illegal immigrants as you would American citizens, but giving them, in effect, better treatment, special privileges because they're here illegally. I don't know. I can't. It's very hard to imagine that an American citizen in Zarate's position would have been acquitted on all these charges.
No, this is basically a lifelong career criminal, and the justification for letting him go is that there's no evidence of violent crime, just non-violent crime. But the very term sanctuary city is designed to shut down the argument, because who do you give sanctuary to? You give sanctuary to refugees, to those fleeing injustice. How can there be something called a sanctuary city if it was holding up a place for criminals to hold up? The very term is designed to shut down the debate. And the reason Donald Trump is president is because he declined to operate with those constraints. Most of the other Republican nominees 2 years ago, the Jeb Bushes and Lindsey Grahams and all the rest of it, were cowed by that kind of language, by sanctuary city and all the rest of it. And Donald Trump, in fairness, recognized. I mean, I weep for Kate Steinle's parents tonight. I do not know how I could go on living in that city if, God forbid, my daughter were to be shot by someone who should never have been in the country in the first place, and is actually being protected by the entire bureaucracy, political, media class of the country at the expense of American citizens.
That's exactly right. Really quickly, it's hard to imagine now, but 2 years ago when this happened, the behavior of the city of San Francisco, allowing this guy to go free in the face of requests from the feds to hold him, that was denounced by Hillary Clinton in the middle of the presidential race. Things have changed so much in 2 years in the Democratic Party. I wonder how many Democratic office holders will criticize his verdict tomorrow.
Yeah, and if you remember, Bernie Sanders championed American citizens and American workers. It's not going to be that way in the 2020 campaign. They've moved just in 2 years.
Pretty stunning. Mark Stein, thank you for that perspective.
I'm joined now by Phil Van Stockham, who served as an alternate juror on the Steinle trial. Phil, thanks for being here tonight. Good to have you with us. I just want to start by, you weren't aware that he was a 7-time convicted felon and that he had been kicked out of the country 5 times and managed to make his way back in, or that ICE had asked for him to be detained and that he was let go from a San Francisco holding area. You weren't aware of any of that, right?
None of that was discussed during the trial. We were told at the beginning of the trial that immigration was not at issue in this trial. It did not pertain to the evidence or the law surrounding the specific charges that were at issue.
All right. The thing that I think was the most shocking to most of us who watched this whole process was, the first degree, the second-degree murder charges went by, but the involuntary manslaughter was the one that is really hard to understand. And I'd like you to tell us why you think the jury went the way it did. And you did not cast a final vote because you were an alternate. But the way it was charged to all of you was that it had to meet 2 requirements for involuntary manslaughter: a crime that was committed in the act that caused the death, and that existed because he had a possession of a felony firearm. And then number 2, the defendant acted with criminal negligence. He did something that an ordinary person would have known was likely to lead to someone's death. Both of those, as I read them, seem to add up really consistently with what happened here.
Sure, I can explain that. This is where I've seen the most confusion about the verdict in this trial, was on the manslaughter charge. So number 1 that you mentioned, a crime had to be committed during the act that caused death. It couldn't be any crime. The crime was specified by the prosecutor, and the jury had to use the crime that was specified by the prosecutor. And in this case, that was specified as brandishing of a weapon. When that was read to us in the jury instructions at the end of the trial, right before the closing arguments, I think that was the first time that we'd heard the word brandishing during this 5-week trial. There was no evidence of brandishing. Brandishing means waving around in a threatening manner. There's no evidence that the defendant did that, and there's no testimony, no witnesses even.
So you think that was an error on the part of the prosecution, that they were so specific in their description of it, because a crime committed in the act of causing the death is much broader than that. So, you think that was a mistake?
Well, I assume that they were required to be specific. I'm not a legal expert, so I don't know why they chose brandishing specifically as opposed to something else like illegal possession of a firearm. But they may have been restricted in that. I just can't say. But from the perspective of a juror, that made it a non-starter for the manslaughter charge. The jury just simply could not lawfully convict him of that charge as it was written.
Yeah. In terms of the larger picture here, as a San Francisco resident, does the policy that allowed him to come in and out and to have a retainer request on him from ICE that was not observed, that was not upheld by the city, and they let him go, does that bother you?
Well, first of all, none of that was at issue in the case, and I don't have any special information that your viewers don't have about that. I actually haven't really thought about it all that much. We had to keep it out of our minds during the trial, and the jurors did a really good job of that, I think. And so, my opinion about that is no more informed or better than anyone else's.
All right. Phil, thank you very much. I know it's been a long haul, and we thank you for the participation that you took in the legal process that we all live under and are part of, and I appreciate you speaking with us tonight. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Attacks against conservatives on college campuses continue after a vigil for Kate Steinle, set up by UC Berkeley's college Republicans, is destroyed. A poster of Kate Steinle, the young woman who was killed by a 5-time deported illegal immigrant, was found torn and thrown in the trash the morning after the campus candlelight vigil. Joining me now is one of the students who helped plan that vigil, campusreform.org correspondent and UC Berkeley student Troy Warden. Troy, thanks for being with us.
Thank you for having me on.
You're welcome. You had the vigil last week. Tell me why and what happened.
Well, we wanted to hold a vigil in order to honor the memory of Kate Steinle, who was a victim of legal immigration. Her killer was just acquitted, and we wanted to make a statement that we really remembered her, that we weren't going to let her be forgotten, as she's been forgotten in most of the mainstream media. And so that's what we wanted to do. We wanted to honor her memory and basically communicate what she stood for, who she was, to students on campus. And normally vigils aren't contentious at UC Berkeley. You can pretty much wave an ISIS flag around on campus and no one will bat an eye. This has been detailed in campus reform articles before. UC Berkeley is not a stranger to outlandish or unique things. But the moment we held a vigil for Kate Steinle, an Antifa organization, Refuse Fascism, sent a paid activist to basically desecrate the memorial, to interrupt it, to call us fascist, bigots, racists, etc. Our message, our message of honoring Kate was totally lost in this protest.
It's hard to see that. I mean, we've all been following this case for so long. I had the opportunity to sit down with her family and interview them, and so I saw firsthand the pain that they're going through, and then to see Kate Steinle's poster, her face, thrown in the trash. We've been showing those images all morning. What happened to that? There's one of the pictures right there. What happened to the memorial? Because we also saw some pictures of all of the candles on the steps of Sproul Hall on your campus, and all of the candles are written out in the word Kate. And we've seen these posters in the trash. What else happened? Because you had flowers, you had candles, the easel with a large picture of her.
Well, we decided to leave the picture out, and we decided to leave the other materials out, just so when students were coming to campus in the morning, that they would be able to see what we had done and maybe take a moment to reflect on what she stood for and what her life meant. But unfortunately, some people took it upon themselves to take those things and either get rid of them or tear them up and put them in the trash can. And this isn't a unique occurrence. Previously, a few days before the vigil, we had actually at night put up posters with Kate's face on them saying she had dreams too. And unfortunately, those were almost immediately taken down and put up with posters of my face on them with the label Soy Warden, which is a sort of a play on my name, Troy Warden. And we knew that Antifa, alt-left activists were taking pictures of us putting up those posters, and they took them down almost immediately. So there are people at Berkeley, at UC Berkeley, who are basically hell-bent on stopping any kind of memorial for this victim of illegal immigration.
Thank you so much, Troy, for being with us. That's unbelievable. God bless you. Thank you for doing that.
Joining me right now is Acting Secretary of Homeland Security, Kevin McAleenan. And Secretary McAleenan, it is good to see you this morning. Thanks so much for joining us.
Good to see you, Maria.
Let's first get a status check after a lot of pushback from the Democrats in terms of money for the border wall, in terms of the funding. How would you characterize funding right now? Are you facing any funding shortfalls that would mean canceling any projects?
So first, let me just acknowledge your point about the dangers our agents are facing out there on the border. We're very glad our agents came out of that encounter okay with their training, with their effective response. But it does highlight this dual nature of what we face at the border security and the humanitarian aspects of what we've been working to counter all year long. But in terms of the funding, I would highlight two different areas. One, we've asked for significant investments in border security. The president's asked for additional border wall from his first day in office. We've received some funding, and not the full amount that we've asked for from Congress. That appropriated funding is already being directed to build wall. But then he declared a national emergency to access additional Department of Defense funding, counter-drug funding, as well as military construction funding that we're now deploying to fund additional wall projects, and including key areas of the border where we need to replace wall that's not effective at all and put new wall there, and also extend our coverage of the border. So with the president's commitment, we're going to have 450 plus miles of wall done by the end of 2020, and we're really ramping up the pace of construction right now.
450 miles by the end of 2020. You're also arresting human smugglers. You are seeing the numbers go down in terms of those people in custody. This is the first time you're talking publicly, first Sunday that you're talking since releasing the August data. Give us some of that data in terms of where we are.
Yeah, what we saw on Monday with our release is the third month of significant progress on the border. The third month in a row of more than a 20% decrease in the flow of people crossing unlawfully or presenting at ports of entry without documents. That's a 56% decline since our peak in May. And that's driven by two factors. First, you got to disrupt the flow, and we've done that with our international partnerships. Government of Mexico has stepped up. They've placed 25,000 National Guard on their southern border on the transportation routes. And we have agreements with Central America America, starting with Guatemala, as well as El Salvador and Honduras, where we're targeting human smugglers. They have more prosecutions ongoing right now of human smugglers, arrests they've made in the last several months, than at any time of the history of the entire region. And that's based on our leadership, engaging Central America, engaging Mexico to focus on this as a shared problem that we need a joint response to. And we're seeing the impact of that in the reduction of the flow.
You also saw a Supreme Court ruling this week on asylum. Give us your sense in terms of the impact. It's being called a game changer.
Yeah, that's the other side of the coin. In addition to the disruption with our international partnerships, it's the efforts we're taking using existing law in the books. Since we can't get Congress to help fundamentally change the immigration law to strengthen the system and the framework, we're using the existing law in the books in innovative ways to place additional layers where we can have integrity in that process and repatriate people that don't have a valid claim to stay in the United States. So this recent Supreme Court ruling gives us another tool to address the asylum problem and the weaknesses in our asylum system that have been inviting this flow over time. So it's another thing we're going to put in place in the coming weeks and months to ensure that we don't have to release people that don't have a valid claim and we can repatriate them effectively.
Mr. Secretary, talk a bit about what's in the law today in terms of immigration for this country, because the president's skeptics, and certainly on that Democrat stage this past week, the Democrats like to talk about the president's push on illegal migrants coming into this country as if that's the policy. But you have a policy where we let in how many people on a regular basis every year?
Yeah, there's a whole focus on just one side of our efforts at the Department of Homeland Security. We also, our Citizenship and Immigration Services Bureau has naturalized more people last year than any year in our history. Over 1 million people that went through the lawful process and had a valid right to remain in the U.S. So it's a huge part of our effort as a department to both ensure that lawful immigration system is functioning effectively, and we are properly processing people applying for citizenship. But of course, we have to have that security element and ensure people that are trying to come unlawfully are not allowed to stay.
Yeah.
I'd also like to emphasize, Maria, that we remain the most generous nation in the world in terms of processing both refugee and asylum applications, and we continue to do that work as well.
Right. I mean, if we're letting in 1 million or 1.2 million every year, the illegals that we're talking about are jumping the line. Right? So the people who waited to get their citizenship, their naturalization through the green card process, et cetera, they have waited and done it the legal way. You've got the illegals just getting in the front of the line to just try to get it first.
That's exactly right, and that's why these measures, including the Supreme Court ruling on the asylum rule, are so important, because it allows us to combat that unlawful entry and repatriate people that are trying to jump the line and give us more resources and space to focus on those that are following the rules.
Secretary, I want to ask you.
Acting Commissioner of U.S. Customs and Border Protection, Mark Morgan. Mark, welcome.
Good morning.
Mark,
Thank you.
We are now at a point where Eric Holder has to come out and try to restore some sanity, and he's the one actually talking about why borders matter. What has happened to the Democratic Party?
So, Jedediah, first of all, it's interesting, and I hope people now are actually listening to what former Attorney General Eric Holder said. If this happens, if we put a moratorium on deportations, you are going to see the numbers of people illegally entering this country in unbelievable numbers. It's absolutely going to give the signal that we have open borders. And if the American people thinks that what we're experiencing right now is a crisis, it's going to make this look like an easy day going forward. It's incredulous that somebody would be saying that at this time.
Now, we've seen, Mr. Commissioner, border apprehensions drop, that their enforcement go up, also a partnership with Mexico. But we do have a Fox News alert this morning as well. A Border Patrol agent was shot and injured Friday night while conducting a traffic stop near the Texas-Mexico border. Another agent shot and killed the gunman, are the news reports. So there's still incidences going on the border, but how is our cooperation with Mexico going overall?
So first of all, I want to make sure everybody understands that the agent, we actually had an agent that was shot, and he was actually survived because he was wearing his ballistic vest. And I really want to encourage all the men and women in law enforcement to make sure they're wearing their ballistic vest going forward, because that absolutely saved his life. I talked to both of those agents yesterday, and they're both doing okay at this time. So right now, with the government of Mexico, they have stepped up in unprecedented ways. This president, this current administration, their negotiations with not just the government of Mexico, but also the Northern Triangle countries, have really got them to step up, acting as true partners, really seeing this as a regional crisis that it is, not just a United States crisis, and they're doing a tremendous job. Now, we still need them to continue to work for us to sustain this, continue their efforts to support the Migrant Protection Protocol, but make no mistake, they're doing an incredible job in supporting us, and that is a significant reason why we've seen a 57% reduction in apprehensions just over the last 90 days.
Commissioner, we've seen these reports saying that your agency, as well as the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, have been constructing more than 65 miles of new border wall. I saw a report, though, in the last 24 hours ago or so ago suggesting that maybe there's another 20 miles that was supposed to be constructed that's been put on hold because you don't have the money for it. What's fact? What's fiction?
So, Ed, I'm so glad you asked this question. So the latter part of that is complete fiction. It's a complete false narrative. Right now, 65 miles of new wall that you just mentioned. And every single mile of wall that's being built exponentially increases the Border Patrol's capacity to safeguard this country. And right now, with the recent Supreme Court decision and the Secretary of Defense authorizing additional money, no, we're full on board. We're actually starting projects in multiple locations simultaneous. Nothing's been put on hold. And by the end of 2020, we're still looking to be on track for over 450 new miles of border wall.
Briefly, Mr. Commissioner, you mentioned the Supreme Court. That ruling said that this administration or our government can deny asylum to those who could have claimed it in Mexico first. What impact do you think that'll have?
It's huge. It's a huge victory. Even though we're waiting for it to be heard on the merits, we're going to be able to implement this immediately now along the southwest border. And here's what the American people need to understand. What this rule says is, if you're fleeing a country because of persecution or violence or another legitimate asylum claim, we want you to seek help and relief from the first country you get to. Don't give your money, don't mortgage your home and give that money to the cartels and risk your life to transverse over multiple countries to get relief. This rule is telling those individuals, the vulnerable population, stop at the first country you come to, get relief there. That's what this rule is about.
Important stuff. Interesting. All added all together, it looks like pretty heavy emphasis on securing that border. Mr. Commissioner, thank you very much for your time.
Thanks so much.
We appreciate it.
Thank you.